Hold on, my friends. Okay, during the last session, cycle 3, one of the events I had one of my scout ships go in deeper into the solar system to explore more of the system that I'm trying to, or potentially I'm going to colonize. And we know that there's a grassland with no name just yet, and we have searched this section, and I'm going to say I did this section, and there was nothing in that section, but I had an event, and the event that was rolled up was a Merc starship contracted by one of my platinums put self under house. It is a Tech 2 warship, otherwise a sloop. And so before I go any further, I want to make use of this thing. So in order to do that, I need to build the ship. And so we know that it's a sloop, and we start with the Tech 2 hull because Tech 1 is a gunboat or a scout ship. So we choose our ship class in the case of it goes into classes and stuff. So I'm looking for my Tech 2 hull. And so the Tech 2 hull is here. We don't care about costs because we're not actually building it. This is a ship that already exists. So the overall tonnage is 299. So what that means is the maximum amount of ship components that consist of this ship has to be under 299 or over 100, because then it puts it in that class 2 category. A hull itself, so we're going to go hull 2, and its tonnage is 36 tons. So 36 tons of the 299 is the hull. And it has 2 sections. And I can choose to do a bow and an aft or 2 decks. And I think I will go 2 decks. And each section has armor 80 and damage reduction of 8. So this brings us to the next component, which means I should have to have a crew deck in order for the crew to operate, or a navigation or life support system. So we're looking at navigation first. So we're going to stick with the Tech 2 theme, so nothing will be greater than Tech 2, so Tech 1, Tech 2. So we have a Navicomputer 2, and it weighs 18.5 tons. So let's see, 36, that's 4854 and a half of our 229s. It gives us a range of +2 per jump and a movement of +2. All right. We'll move on to the next part. Crewing the ship, mass push, and that's sublight drives. Crew living deck. We'll go with a crew living deck 2, which is 12 tons. Now we're at 66.5 of our 299, and the ship can handle, crew can rate between 31 and 60. And we're not going to have a passenger deck, we're not going to have an entertainment deck. And since it's a sloop, I'm going to not have a barracks living deck for troops. So generally, your crew's capacity for the living deck is not going to be exceeded by the ship's crew. So there should be more than enough room here to handle up to potentially a platoon of troops. So we can go bypass that. So life support system. And we're looking at a life support 2, which can support up to 60 crew. Life support 2 weighs 18.5. So now we're at 67, 77, 85. Carries food, oxygen, and water at 10 tons apiece, and supports 31 to 60. right? And cargo bays, moving colonists, slicing of ship systems, lifeboat bays. Generally, I'm a big believer of lifeboat bays. You could choose not to have them, but I think that's kind of, I don't know, that seems pretty retarded not to. So I'm going to have 2 class 2 lifeboats. So lifeboat bay 2, and each one weighs 2 tons, so that's 4 tons. So now we're at 89, and each supports up to 60 passenger crew passengers. And then we're going to go to cargo decks. Now, technically speaking, we don't need to include a cargo deck if it's a warship, but even warships need supplies and consumables. And ideally, having surplus of more than what your ship's rated for is not a bad thing. Plus, there's the idea of moving other stuff around. So I think it's worth having. So we are going to look and have a single deck, a cargo bay 1, since it's the smallest, and it weighs 11.5 tons. So 89, 90, we're at 105. 89, 100.5 tons. Cargo max 100 tons. So what that does is this adds to the mass rate of the ship. So currently, our mass rate of our ship is going to be 299. That's the total weight of all the components, plus 100 tons of cargo right now. So now we're at 399. So when it comes to figuring out maneuverability and evasive maneuvers, how many sublight drives does our ship require to get the maximum amount of maneuverability, that helps determine that. Small craft bays, it's a sloop, so by right, it's too small, in my opinion, to warrant a small craft bay, and those things can really suck up the tonnage when it comes to movement. It's possible, but it's not something I want to do at this moment. So we're going to look at weapon magazine systems and hardpoint connectors. We'll go to the hardpoint connectors first. A reinforced heavy airlock with a series of clamps and cradles designed to allow pods, small craft, and other starships to be docked and transported through star jump. Each external section may support up to 2 HPCs. So, by theory, my sloop could carry 4 small craft attached to the hull, or cargo pods, or something like this. Of course, every additional amount of tonnage that gets plugged in affects its maneuverability and its speed and sublight. So there's only so much SLDS, the sublight drives, that we can install to help mitigate that. Meanwhile, we're keeping in mind that we're not dealing with a cargo vessel here, or a passenger liner potential, but a warship. So reality is we only really need 1, maybe 2 hardpoint connector HPCs, and 1 would allow it to, you'll always want a minimum of 1, because this is what allows it to dock to other ships. This basically is the main airlock system. It's not to say that there wouldn't be smaller airlocks, but this is a system that's designed to interlock with other ships and small craft and space stations and so on and so forth. So ideally, we want to have at least 1, and I'm going to go ahead and have 2. So I will have 2 HPCs, and they're all just a set technology of 1, so there's no advantages to having a Tech 5 version of an HPC. It doesn't change anything. So they weigh 9 tons apiece, so that would be 18 tons. So now we're at 118.5, and this allows us, 2 HPCs with 0 mass. So right now our mass is still at 399. Potentially, when we factor up our movement and maneuverability factors at the end, then we will give ourselves, if each HPC is rated to up to 100 tons, then our mass total would be 399 plus 200, which would be 599. So 600 tons, which means we'd have to have enough SLDs, sublight drives, to get the maximum amount of maneuverability out of 600 tons of mass. So that might reduce how many SLDs we have. It also might give our ship the advantage of having a higher maneuverability rate if it's not carrying external cargo or other ships. So there's a value to it. So we'll move on to star drives. Now, star drives, of course, is how much engine you need to move the mass through space. And this is where it's important, because if I'm going to factor the HVCs at, let's just say, 150 tons of mass, then I'm going to mass of 399, 499, 549, 549 that I have to account for sublight drives. And if I include a weapons magazine, which is additional mass, so let's just rate this totally for 600. We'll just go ahead and artificially rate this for 600. This gives us a little bit more leeway. So a single SLD2 weighs 21 tons, has a movement modifier of +2. So with the navigator and a sublight drive together, I actually have a sublight movement, or a star movement of 4. That means we can move 4 light years per jump. Mass push one engine can move is 450 tons. So mass push is 450, which means I want to exceed the 600. So the 600, having 450 is not sufficient to meet the 600-ton need. Now, I could ideally put a second sublight drive Tech 2 in here, and this would then give me 900. But that's excessive. It's also excessive weight, and every star drive that we have uses a ton of fuel, so that matters. We're still going to have a second star drive. It also caveat that what we're looking at, we've set the maximum jump by the original the star drive 2 sets to jump. So if we plug in an SD1, a Tech 1 star drive, it's going to gain us that extra 150 we need to hit our 600-ton goal, and it will not stack. Movement does not stack. So all we get out of it is additional mass push at a cost of another point of fuel. So we have a backup. And that's another point in a pinch. Having the backup smaller drive means if we absolutely had to, we could dispose of all the tonnage we could and potentially make an emergency jump with a massive possibility of a failure happening by having that single lower drive. But by having the two, we also now have a fuel consumption that's twice the normal. So fuel is ×2 per jump, and this brings our weight to 118, 130, 139, 140, 150. So we've used 150 tons of our 299-ton max so far, and that's not bad. Now we're going to move to, this gives you the explanation of how movement, range of jump starts, how things like that work in the game. Sublight drives. All right. So there's a chart here, a handy chart here that says maneuverability to hit modifier, maneuverability modifier chart. So when we're looking at how many sublight drives we want to have, to get 1 point of maneuverability, we need to have a maximum of each mass push for an individual sublight drive is 150. So we would need a minimum of 4 to get our 600 tons of mass pushed around a solar system, around orbit, in and out of orbit, things like this. And that would take 12 tons of mass. But in order to increase that modifier, we want to increase more our maneuverability factor, because the maneuverability factor of 1 is pretty slow. Pretty much everything can outrun it and catch up to it, which is not necessarily good for a combat ship, in my opinion, and especially the smaller ships. The smaller the combat ship, the more maneuverability it really needs to be, or it's going to be at a disadvantage, because the maneuverability and speed is also a defensive, offensive modifier. It's additional armor if it's harder to hit something. So in this case, we want to go with the SLD2, which I can do here, which means I need 2 of these to hit the 300, to hit the 600. That would be 9. So now we'll get 159, but I want more maneuverability. So in order to get more maneuverability, and the max maneuverability is 4, so 4.0. So in this case, we could have, let's see, I think it goes up. Yeah, forgive me, it's been a minute since I've done these things. All right. To gain the base ship maneuverability 1.2 in real space, for every additional SLD added beyond this point, the ship gains another 2.2 maneuverability. The maximum that any starship or cutter can have is 4.0. So in this case, my Tech 2 SLD sublight drives gives me the mass push that I want, but I want to have additional maneuverability. So I'm going to add, and let's see. So it takes 5 SLDs per point, so 3 points is 15, 16, 17, I think it's 18. So we want 18 sublight drives, Tech ones, and they weigh 3 tons apiece. So 18 times 3, so that, let's see, 24, 44. No. So I get, or not doing math in 100 years either. All right. 8, 16, 24. Yeah, 54. So 54 additional tons. So now we are at 213 tons for our ship. We have a maneuverability of 4.0 loaded at 600. And remember, we can't exceed 4.0, so that's just the way it works. Now, we also need to have fuel cells. In order to have fuel cells for our ship, for our star drive, and also for our sublights. So moving at maximum maneuverability, I'm using, according to this, 1 ton of fuel. 1 ton of fuel is consumed per cycle of activity for 10 SLDs. So if I have a total of 20, that means this ship moving at maximum maneuverability around a solar system is going to use 2 tons of fuel every cycle. Now I can choose within a solar system, it's only necessary to bring that high maneuverability in combat scenarios or trying to escape combat. So just moving around, we can just slow the ship down and conserve fuel consumption. But it's important to note that there is a cost for having that much more capacity. So in this case, I am going to put a fuel cell Tech 2, which costs 24 tons. So now I am 237 of my 299. I have a range of +5, and I have fuel capacity of 14 tons. So on a normal jump, my ship's going to consume 2 tons of fuel, which means I can make 7 jumps before needing to refuel the ship. And I can also make, inside of normal space maneuvering, I can make 14 movement cycles worth of movement within a solar system at a reduced speed, or I can make 7 cycles worth of combat maneuvers at high maneuverability and consumption. So it balances itself out. So that brings us to 237 tons, which means we got a little bit of room left over for weapon systems and other additional things, including shields. Generally speaking, I always highly recommend adding gun mounts to every ship. And gun mounts are small, think of blister mounts on the side of the ship that you mount vehicle grade weapon systems. So they're against other warships, they're going to be very lightly, they're not going to do much. But against starfighters, against shuttles, against small asteroids, against ground targets, that's where these things have their value. and it's, in my opinion, worth having. And the Tech 2 version is 2 tons apiece, and it contains 5 hardpoints. So I can potentially put up to 5 hardpoints worth of vehicle grade weapons. So I could put some pretty potent weapons inside one of these gun mounts. And so in this case, I can have 2 per hull section. So remember, I started out this being a Tech 2 hull, which means it has 2 sections. And I'm choosing to have a top deck and a lower deck, which means I can have 4 gun mounts, and I can put 2 on the top and 2 on the bottom. Or I can split the ship in half and have 2 on the port and 2 on the starboard. Or I could have 2 on the aft, or 1 on the aft, 1 on the bow, and 1 on top, 1 on the bottom. It's just a matter of how you decide to place it, but you place it when you're developing the ship. That way it's already set. So that way you know what your firing arcs are going to be. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and have 4 gun mount Tech 2s at 2 tons apiece. So now I got another 8 tons. So now we're at 245, and hard point plus 5 each. Now it brings us to shields. Shields are an interesting setup. So there's two things to keep in mind when installing shields in a warship. My Tech 1 scouts have a single Tech 1 shield, and that's basically giving it a minimal defense and takes up minimal space. Now, because we have a sloop with 2 hull sections, I need to have a shield generator in each section to create shielding for both sections of the ship. It's possible to shield one half of the ship and not shield the other, and then you left that other half exposed. So you want one in each. But you can also have a second tier shield. So the way this would work is, in my sloop, I'll have a shield generator in both sections. Then I'll have a third shield generator that's generating an overlapping shield for the entire ship. And so potentially you could have partial shielding by doing this, but you have redundancies. You choose to do that, and they don't stack. So in order for this to how this plays out, the outer shield gets destroyed first, or eliminated first, and then it exposes the 2 internal shields, and those then begin to take the absorb damage until they also fail. So in this case, I'm going to need 2 shield 1s, and they weigh 9.5 tons apiece. So now we're talking, let's see, 9 to 18, so 19 tons. And now we are at 45, 50, 59, 64, 264. I have a defense plus 10 per section. Recharge is plus 3 per combat round. Or, no, plus 3 per cycle. And then we're going to have a single shield 2 as a center shield, because I can do this, and that weighs 15. So now we are at 279 defense plus 16, recharge plus 4. All right, so 279, and let's see what leaves me left. 299 minus 279 is 20 tons. So I have 20 tons of cargo, potential cargo, or 20 tons of internal space left to use. And what I don't have is a naval weapon. And I could include electronic countermeasures. I can add other systems in here. There's some other stuff that you can plug in, but I think that a warship, and the idea of being a warship, it needs to have some kind of weapon system that can be a threat to another ship. Now we have kinetic weapons, we have missile weapons, and we have energy-based weapons. So here's where we run into some scenario issues. Kinetic weapons and missile weapons require a weapons magazine, and there are 2 types. There's a full magazine and a partial magazine, and the WeMag A weighs 10 tons and carries a capacity for 80 tons of reloads, where the weapons magazine B is a Tech 2, which is much smaller, carries 20 tons of ammo for 2 tons. So potentially I could have several point defense guns or one naval autocannon and two of the small weapon magazines. And that's it for the kinetic weapons, because they don't everything else is too heavy for what we have left for the sloop. In missile batteries, I could have a single missile battery, and the only ammo it carries is what it has, so it would not have any way to reload. This brings us to energy-based weapons, which do not require weapons mags, and of course they're also a bit heavy, and they also have downtime. So they go through, once they boost up their shots, it takes quite a while to recharge it. So in the case of the naval laser battery has a mass of 20 tons, and it carries enough for 45 shots, which is quite respectable. The recharge rate is one shot per day, so it can take quite a while unless you're plugged in at a starport or a larger warship that can provide additional energy base. So, right, and the options are, of course, just to fire one single shot or up to 3 shots at the same time. So if you're doing 3 laser bolts at a time, you're going to use up your 45 shots much faster, but you're going to deal more damage. The downside is, of course, you can only shoot once per combat round, so if you choose to go one at a time, you're going to do minimal damage. But we're looking at the level of scale. Take a look at, if we look back up here at our ship, this hull, or this sloop, has 80 tons of armor with a damage reduction of 8. That means, technically speaking, I would have to fire two bolts at simultaneously to do 14 points of damage, which would then overcome the armor, or the damage reduction of the hull, to start tuning into armor. So I think, for what I want to do, I'm going to go ahead and go with the Tech 2 naval laser battery, because that's the smallest. So NLB 2 at 20 tons, that brings us to 299. And there you go. This gives us the sloop. So the sloop's range would be 5 plus the range 2 for the Navi computer, so it can range out 7 light years in a jump if it had that ability. Its movement is based on the star drives, which gives us a movement of 2, and the naval Navi computer is 2, so our movement is plus 4. So even though we have a movement or range that's greater than our movement, that just means we can always jump up to 4 light years at a time, and our fuel consumption is going to be times 2 per use, regardless, unless we're maneuvering. So anyway, that's how we figure out our ship. And like I said, one of the interesting parts of the game is that over time you either buy, barter, steal, or salvage components from all kinds of different sources, and so you start stockpiling these things until you get enough of them together, or your shipyard is able to produce enough of the stuff you need to cobble together or to create a ship from scratch using the blueprint formulas. So we know, based off of hull sizes, what our limitations are and what can be done, and within that is quite a few. So I mean, if you go and we look at things like we could have the standard sloop, a fleet escort, raider, or long raider patrol or heavy scout, a SDB, a system defense boat tender, customs enforcement, special duty courier, or whatever. So I mean, the list here goes up and down. So sloops are primary design principles: maneuverability, the ability to move, its range, and offense and defense, as opposed to a Tech 2 medium freighter, whose cargo capacity, movement, range, and defense. So its primary purpose is cargo capacity, right? So anyway, that's how we set up a design our sloop. Till next time, you guys have a great weekend.